They all stood or sat in their designated positions around the chamber, as instructed, and began channeling as they had become accustomed to, in order to guide their home in times past, before the arrival of this other prime. They all glowed with power so great that anything non-tempered for such began to soften and melt as the magic increased. It exuded from them, rising to the levels of lethality beyond what even they themselves were accustomed to, all the while keeping themselves in check in mind and body. They would not, could not fail, for the good of all. As they held their positions, 52 in all, the true prime in the center of the chamber glowed ever more fiercely, as it received more and more magical energies, its color fluctuating constantly in a kaleidoscope of lethality. Above this true prime fragment hovered the many-armed form of thuliseak, conducting the magic like an enthused maniacal maestro, and the true prime reacted according to his whims. "We are almost there!" they shouted into their minds, linked as they all were, acting as one in their intent. "We are so close! Just a little more, and I can do what is needed!" The levels continued to rise, and as they peaked for what was required, they felt several of the dragons falter and turn their attention directly to them. They began weaving paths for the escaping magic to others of their number who could manage it, where the others were failing. They were doing admirably, far ahead of what they believed possible, and far more so than thuliseak had believed. This is going to work. It's actually going to. And their thoughts stopped in their tracks as they sensed something that should not be here, something he thought he had diverted from this prime. They could sense him. Currently, he was heading from the edges of the citadel toward them, with a group of his own creations, but nothing threatening. However, the answer to the lost grey was now answered, as they sensed and saw their form. The guardians engaged them, but thuliseak knew they could not stop their progress, or not him at least, and they spoke to their defenders as they fought him. With a heavy heart he sensed their identities fade, and he knew they had taken the only path they could to ensure they protected what they had to. And once done here they would be remembered as they should be, but right now they had to remove him from this place as fast as possible. But first, a distraction. Thuliseak wove their arms, speaking a silent incantation in an unknown tongue, and from the true prime a pulse of power was sent out. Their body shook briefly, and they observed that he was briefly stunned. Yes, this would suffice for what was needed. Next, thuliseak brought all of their hands together, and then seemed to pull another of themselves from their body as they withdrew their hands. The other form repeated this process until there were 3 of them. Yes, this should do just fine. The original began the ritual as needed for what they were trying to achieve, while one of their duplications continued the incantation that had stunned him. It would slow him and keep him off balance long enough. At least that was the intention. The third of them left the area, blinking from the chamber and appearing some way behind him, watching as he reeled from the second pulse. He began moving toward the chamber, so the distraction was needed now. They ripped at their form, so as to be showing obvious signs of injury, and then began to push a deep plane of magic from their wounds, one they were sure he had not encountered. Then they called out to him, brandishing their familiar arms in a show of defensive measure. "Scourge, I sensed you were here," they shouted weakly, clearly injured. He stopped and turned, sneering at him. "I will not fall for your tricks again, thuliseak. I have lost too much time already to such." And with that another pulse struck him. Thuliseak shifted their weight and winced as they did, their wounds leaking more planar energies. "I am warning you, as I did before. You have already lost this place," they said, as he grimaced, coughing heavily, and allowing more of this magic to leak forth. And so have I. Another pulse emanated from the chamber, briefly stunning him again. The energies were definitely tiresome, and left him vulnerable for a short time, and this was clearly not sitting well with him. Good, they thought. After all, if he could escape this inconvenience, then it would all aid in pushing him towards the decision they needed him to make of his own volition, without their perceived meddling. Yes, it would all help. He stood, taking in his foe, and sensed the plane of magic was not coming from the chamber, but from their very wounds. Injured, I see. And just what would do such to one as you? He was sure this would end in yet another lie. They coughed as they smiled weakly, staggering slightly. Your true self, they sputtered, and held up several hands in a sign of non-aggression, as yet another pulse of stunning power hit him. I come here to warn you, not to fight. I know where they lie, and I know they plan your downfall. They nodded to him. And this could be your only chance while they are recovering. He was clearly unsure of what he was hearing, but if nothing else, they were injured. He may not get another chance. But I am my true self, trickster, he said, his voice straining from the effects fading from the last pulse. I speak of the one you came from, the first. Was this true? Did he truly have a way to reach that which he had been part of? Did he have the location of his progenitor Damon? Another pulse struck. Yes, I do, came the answer, and he remembered this one could read his mind if unguarded. Where? He shouted as he drew closer, shrugging off the stunning effects yet again. In the plane that flows from my wounds, as I am attached to it as a demon would be to their own. As he neared, he could sense the pain in their form. He could actually sense them. Properly sense them. They were actually there and injured. This was an opportunity he could not pass up, and so he began to walk purposefully towards them. As he reached them, they raised their hands again as a defensive measure, grimacing in pain as they did. It was working, thuliseak thought as they continued to weave the incantation and perform the ritual. He is buying it, now to lead him away. The third waited for him to stop, and painfully arced a few of their arms to weave a portal. Again he studied their actions, but could detect no magic from their weaving. At least not until the rip in the prime appeared, and the same magic that flowed from their wounds began pouring from it. There, they said, motioning to the fast-shrinking portal. He looked to the portal, eager to discover what lay beyond, but this chance to finally best this foe and take his knowledge was a possibility. He could only choose one, and one would never arise again, whereas the other would not likely to be in such a vulnerable state before him. I cannot keep the portal open as I am waning, they said, looking to him, and I cannot open up another. So the decision was to pursue the one-time chance or take advantage. Another pulse struck him, harder this time. Still, he would have plenty of time and power to take them in the future. So he moved toward the portal, silently glad to believe in this place of magic that somehow managed to stunt even his power. The third nodded as he paused at the portal. Your mercy is noted, Scourge, they said, a sickening smile of pain spreading across their face. May you find the answers, and perhaps the peace you seek for all our sakes. With that, he launched himself through the portal and into the unknown, chasing the taste of these foreign threads as he pushed away along their flow. He would discover this truth they had spoke of, and then he would return to take the place of the dragons. It was, after all, not like it was going anywhere he could not find again. The third nodded as he passed from view, immediately severing the connection and collapsing the portal as they did so. Surprisingly simple, they mused, before shaking like a dogwood after a swim in the lake. The wounds they had sported seemed to evaporate, and their stance was immediately that of their norm. The ruse had been successful, and as such had now been accomplished, the seconds ceased their incantation, and with it the stunning pulse. They turned their attention to the grey that lay injured at the far end of the passage, where the guardians had fallen. They moved swiftly to them and began the deconstruction of the shade of them, thread by thread, learning all they could about the process and nature of its construction. The grey roared in pain as the process began, but they pushed on, ensuring with adeptness that they could not move nor fight back. As they tore at the threads, dissecting them, examining their structure and form, they found fragments of those memories that had been drawn from the original. They feared them as much as him now, as what they were doing was exactly as he had done to them when he had made them his own. They saw visions of how he had held them down, tore them apart sinew by sinew, thread by thread. The third now understood how it was being done, how he was duplicating entities. They felt sorrow and pity for the fragmented creation that he had crafted. He did this to everything he took, every single entity. The true horror of how he functioned was finally known to them, and it was worse than even they had fathomed. He held their fullness within him, entrapped for an eternity, forever tormented in the prison of his own form, not destroyed, but held in a never-ending torment from which they could never escape. Everything they had ever been was now his. The creations were given an imprint, a mere suggestion of what they once were, and nothing further. The rest of them held as his trophies evermore. They now knew, at least, how he could create these shades so perfectly, but this also meant that perhaps they could still be saved, as he had not fed upon them and obliterated them, but had instead held them as templates for creations. This proved that they had not been devoured, but entrapped. Perhaps he could be weakened by removing such from him, removing his ability to create by saving that template. Could they rescue those trapped from his grasp if weakened? It appears I have much ahead of me. Thuliseak sighed as they eased the pain of the grey, before finally ending their current existence. But as they did so, they held their thread, an almost imperceptible fragment of their truth, a minuscule sliver of their shattered soul's essence. They would live on with them for now, and in time they would find a way to aid them if they were able, the influence of him being removed from their now pure sliver. Then, with a glance around the empty corridors, they blinked back to the chamber, taking up position to face the other two, and began to incant with them as one. And so the ritual of removal now began.